Hello and welcome to Breaking Culture Live. I'm your host, Sean Johnson Andrews. Thanks for supporting this experiment in scholarly communication. Every Wednesday, we speak to academics and activists, or in this case, today's guest is an academic activist or an activist academic, breaking down the breaking news and helping us to understand and intervene in cultural trends. I'm really pleased to welcome Todd Wolfson back to the show. I spoke with Todd back in January, and since that time, his work with the AAUP and the AFT has become even more urgent. Todd Wolfson is Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers and President of the American Association of University Professors, a nonprofit organization of higher education faculty and other academic professionals. For the last 6 years, he's been in leadership of Rutgers AAUP-AFT, which represents 6,000 faculty, grad workers, postdocs, and counselors at Rutgers University. Wolfson is an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at Rutgers University. He's an anthropologist by training, and he's written and edited 3 books: Digital Rebellion, The Birth of the Cyber Left; The Great Refusal, Herbert, Marcuse, and the Contemporary Social Movements; and The Gig Economy, Workers and Media in the Age of Convergence, along with dozens of peer-reviewed articles. He's also the co-director of the Media Inequality and Change Center, a partnership between the University of Pennsylvania and Rutgers. And prior to his work as an academic union leader, Wolfson worked as a community and labor organizer in Philadelphia. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk today at the beginning of the semester, and with an always busy activist schedule. Thanks,
That's
John.
Sean. I mean, I'm just so happy to be here with you again. I love breaking culture and glad to
I'm
get this
glad.
talk.
So I want to start where we left off in January. At the time, you were conducting several lawsuits, and by you, I mean the AAUP, not you directly, although I'm sure it takes up quite a bit of your time. You were suing the Trump administration. They had direct attacks on students, especially international students who were engaged in pro-Palestinian protests during the 23-24 encampments, attacks on funding through their first compact threatening academic freedom, which several universities like Columbia signed on to. And I know a lot's happened since then, both in terms of the political struggle, and I think you also added AFT Vice President to your bio. I don't know exactly when that happened, but I'm sure you've been really busy. So I don't know if you could say a little bit about what's happened since January on the
Wow.
AAUP.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
happy
maybe
to.
maybe
It's
where
such a
those
whirlwind,
fights, there's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, all right, so I'll start with the lawsuits. I mean, you know, first I would say that our assessment is that the courts, when you have an authoritarian regime, the courts are an important but not sufficient avenue.
Sure.
And our assessment was that in and if we can use the courts to slow down some of the excesses, there's so many
Sure.
excesses of our dear friend in the White House, but some of the excesses of that administration, that's good. And then we can figure out how to fight through other avenues as well. Political
Sure.
fights, campus fights, labor fights, like, media, etc. And so, yeah, we filed a lot of lawsuits. I think the number since Trump was elected probably is around 10, and there's more that we're cooking. And sometimes it's AFT that led, sometimes it's AUP that led. They've by and large it's been a successful route for us in slowing down some of the excesses. The 3 biggest court victories, I would say, were some. No, I think some of these might have happened before, actually, or we
Yeah, I
talked
think
last. But the
you
biggest
had
one,
one in September or October, right?
yeah, yeah, AUP v. Rubio
Yeah.
was the one which we went after Rubio and the State Department in particular because of the threat of political speech. They basically said if you say something we don't like, we can deport you based on your political speech. And
Right.
so we sued and we were successful. And basically we wanted um, a bigger determination from the courts, but what we ultimately got was that if you're a member of either AUP or the Middle East Studies Association, and the federal government attempts to deport you, you have a stronger case to defend yourself for your political speech. So they didn't
Right.
give us a blanket decision for
Hmm.
all academics because of the ruling, or there was a ruling that said circuit courts can't give national injunctions. And so because of
Oh,
that
right.
ruling, we only got relief for our members and
Hmm.
Middle East Studies Association members because we're the ones that sued. But
You were the class, basically. You're the only
yeah,
class that it
yeah,
applies to.
which is just ridiculous because that means, all
Yeah.
right, so you're an AAUP member and you're deported because of political speech. You have more protections than if you're not. And that's not what we wanted, obviously. We wanted
No.
all academic workers, and not just workers, students, all people
Yeah.
in higher ed to have those protections. So that was a victory. It wasn't exactly how we wanted it to play out, but that was a victory. And then the two other bigger ones were the Harvard and University of California victories, where we basically challenged the Trump demand letters, which said, "I'm going to freeze X number of billions of dollars in biomedical research because I have a claim that I will not substantiate about anti-Semitism
Sure.
on your campuses." And so we sued in both those cases. Both those cases we won, and they were forced to refund and start the flow of the funding around the grants they had frozen. So I mean that's been and there's more court cases that are emerging. You know, we've done a couple lawsuits recently at Texas.
Yeah, I want to
Um,
talk about that one in a minute.
yeah, so I'll hold off on that. So you know that like is I guess where I'd start. But from January forward, I think one thing, if we could talk in broad terms, in broad strokes, I guess the broad stroke that I'd flag is that they've been changing their strategy. Their very bald, hubris oriented
Hmm.
strategy of just wiping the board and anybody in front of them has had to fall back because they've lost.
Yeah.
They've lost in the courts. They've lost when we fought them on the compact fight. Um, and so they've taken a more moderated approach to things. Um, They've been going after the universities on the grounds of admissions now, DEI admissions. So, and that's
Right.
mostly medical schools, and that's the University of California and Yale. Um, and so there's suits going on there where they're trying to then negotiate larger outcomes from the federal government made sued. Um, and now we've seen Compact 2.0, which is a lighter version than Compact 1.0. And I think it's part of what we're seeing as a broader swing back against the authoritarian regime, fascist regime, and a swing towards a more progressive vision. And they're having to orient themselves to that. And I think higher ed has been, oh, obviously electoral victories have been key to this, but I think higher ed as a sector fighting back has been one of the key sectors that's pushed back
Hmm.
effectively against Trump.
Yeah, it's clearly been something they've been after. They've been
Mhm.
trotting this almost from day one, trying to force find out who gets admitted, who's
Mm,
hired, all of the things that are now in that Compact 2.0 have
all the
been
things.
part of that fight. And recently, I know the AAUP and AFT worked together on a campaign to restore science funding, which was this is a different tack for you all, or it's a different tack than the courts. And I don't know if they're going to pay attention to all the comments that you got, but it looks like it was really successful in terms of mobilizing support. Um, so is this a? I know that you were part of AFT AAUP at Rutgers, but is this a new front in that alliance? In a way,
Yeah,
and
no, AUP and AFT have become fully aligned and are building a singular fight around not only around defending higher ed, but more so around advancing a vision for the future of higher ed. So together we put out a blueprint for the future of the sector, which I can talk about when you want.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think you should imagine that AUP and AFT see ourselves as one higher ed formation that represents 400,000 higher ed workers. And we are the biggest, we are affiliated. And in that affiliation, we're the biggest higher ed union in the country. And I would say the poised to lead both the
Hmm.
defense, but also advance the sector, which is what we want to do. I don't want to sit here and fight against Russell Vought's OMB changes all the time. I want to advance our vision for the sector. Of course, we have to defend against Russell Vogt and the other vampires
Yeah.
that live in Washington, D.C. right now. But that's not what we should be focused on. We should be focused on our vision. And so that's what we really are trying to get to.
Well, yeah, I want to come back to that because that I think is that we talked a little bit about that in January, and that was on the horizon, and it now has come to fruition, or it's been released. So I want to come back to the blueprint for the what is it for the strengthening and transforming higher education that you put out. Um, I was also, but I want to talk about this lawsuit that you've just filed in the state of Texas. I was
Right.
on the phone with a friend of mine who's in Texas, and was kind of lamenting all of the ways that faculty there in the A&M system are kind of being asked to bend over backwards to submit syllabi and everything. Even back in January, Texas was one of the key fronts in this struggle, not at the federal level, but at the state level. They had dissolved all the faculty senates. They'd made even deeper attacks on the faculty governance through this policy that makes it like basically a thought crime to talk about race, gender, sexuality in classes at all. So in August, AAUP filed this lawsuit in support of the faculty at Texas A&M who are being subjected to what I think it's like a very good rhetorical move in the lawsuit. You call it a censorship policy. It makes for some
Mhm.
really scary reading, but it's a very I think it's a strong argument that you're
Yeah.
making there.
I mean, the way Texas has played out, sometime about like 10 months ago, the Texas legislature passed a law. And that law called on, and I don't remember the name, the number on the bill, and the particulars that well right now, so forgive me. But basically, they went after shared governance, and they also went after things like the teaching of race and gender and sexuality, etc. And then this public systems, Texas is one of the greatest public systems in the country. And there's multiple public systems. There's the University of Texas system, the A&M system, the tech system, the Texas state system, and the community college system. And so each one of those systems then implemented the law differently. So University of Texas, they got rid of all of the faculty or university senates. Gone. There's no longer any shared governance. The Texas Tech, Texas A&M, Texas state systems didn't get rid of their faculty senates, but they renamed them faculty councils, and they probably disempowered them some, right?
Hmm.
Um, so, but then also University of Texas at Austin um, shut four departments: the Women and Gender Studies Department, the Mexican and Hispanic Studies Department. I can't remember the exact name. The African and Diasporic Studies Department, and the American Studies Department. And they're going to amalgamate them into one big cultural studies department. We don't know how many layoffs are going to happen, but it's part of this attack on the teaching of race, gender, sexuality, etc. So that's sort of what's happened in the UT system, and UT Austin being the flagship public university in Texas. A&M and Texas Tech systems took a different approach to curriculum and to the teaching of race, gender, etc. They both, and we sued both systems. We sued in both systems, first Texas Tech and then Texas A&M more recently, with Texas AFT AUP. It was a combined lawsuit, and basically they have similar approach, which is you must submit your curriculum, and then the elected the political uh folks look over your syllabus and they say no, your history of slavery reading there is not appropriate for a class on the history of slavery. Sorry, you have to take
Hmm.
out all of those books because we don't want to teach about race or
Hmm.
gender. And so, I think my memory is in the A&M system when they did the review, which was around February, March of this year. they either canceled or moved out of the core 300 classes. One of the most famous was the one where the faculty member had Plato in it, and
Sure.
they took it out because of the Plato. They thought Plato, known as the font of progressive
Yes.
philosophical thought, um,
Because he
was
has a section where he talks about there being more than one gender or gender
yeah,
being
exactly.
fluid
And
or
that's
in
just
some
like,
way.
that like, God forbid somebody actually talk about sex and sexuality and for classes for 22-year-olds. It's just astonishing. So we sued in both A&M and Texas Tech, different lawsuits, same
Mhm.
partners, defending against the same sort of censorship. And yeah, I mean, I think we're going to win because I think these are massive breaches of academic freedom, and massive oversteps by the state government. And I'll say that the famous like precursor to this was Ron DeSantis's Stop Woke Act,
Sure.
which also lost in the courts
Yeah.
this summer. And so I have every expectation. It may take some time to play itself out, but we'll win. We're going to win. They can't do this. They can't censor what we teach on race and gender to the degree they want to. It's way outside the boundaries.
Well, and you say they're not allowed to speak about gender or race, but I think what's even more striking and damning is that one of the key points the lawsuit makes is that there's this explicit it's an explicit asymmetry to the censorship, right? That you talk about this asymmetry of censorship, and as to what's covered by academic freedom. So professors are allowed to give lessons on like heterosexual relationships, but anything dealing with LGBTQ families or concerns is off limits. Or they can say bigoted things about transgender people, but nothing in support of there being more than one gender, or gender being a spectrum,
Right.
really like biological scientific facts at this point. And it gets down into the like very granular. So I mean, it's not just that they're sending in syllabi, but they're, I guess, submitting all the readings to AI and then having the AI kind of look at the readings and
Absolutely.
see. So it gets really granular. And as I was reading this lawsuit, I couldn't help but notice the way this asymmetry is mirrored in this conversation, which I imagine you followed a little bit. I don't know how much, but this American researcher, Nathan Kofnas at the University of Ghent in
Yeah.
Belgium,
Yeah. Yeah.
who
Yeah.
was recently dismissed from his position as part because he's a kind of racist and a
Racist.
eugenicist.
Yeah,
Um,
using
and
like discredited theories that have been discredited for, I don't know, maybe 75 years now.
at least, and stuff that it doesn't pass muster, and that wouldn't have, if that's why he'd been, if he told the University of Ghent that that's what he'd be studying or that's what he'd be talking about, they wouldn't have given him the position in the first place. But now suddenly the ambassador to Belgium is really concerned about academic freedom, and there's all these folks signing letters in support of this guy, looking for academic freedom. So it's not, we have this asymmetrical repression of scholars right here in the U.S., but they're not concerned about that academic freedom. They're concerned about this random guy in
Yeah, I
Belgium.
know. I mean, and let's be clear about what we've seen over the last. I mean, it predates Trump, but let's just say over since the fall of 2023, the extreme repression that we've seen. There's been repression around race and gender, but the extreme repression in United States higher education has been speech around Palestine.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the amount, I mean, the amount of public facing, I mean, obviously there was speech around Charlie Kirk. There was a very short, intense window about a year ago now, around Charlie Kirk and his assassination, where a lot of faculty lost their jobs. And now we're seeing court cases play out where they're winning either back their
Sure.
jobs or they're winning settlements. Um, but save that like short and intense period around Kirk, it's really been about Palestine.
Yeah.
I teach at Rutgers, and Raz Siegel, who got a job at University of Minnesota, and then they took it away because of donor pressure. He's an Israeli who studies genocide. Um, he just got he's at Stockton University, and they just scrubbed his website, his own center's website, on anything to do with genocide in Gaza. The university did. And so these things are over and over and over again is what we're seeing. And I'm Jewish, And I'm hearing an awful lot about anti-Semitism right now, and there is anti-Semitism. We have to be really clear about that. But I do not hear one faculty member punished for their speech about Israel in defense of Israel or attacking Palestine. Not one in this
Mm-hmm.
country. But I've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of examples of the opposite happening, where
Yeah.
speech around Palestine or around like in defense of Palestine, maybe about Israel, maybe even about Zionism, has been extremely and swiftly punished in this country. And it's really telling how strong our commitment to academic freedom and freedom of speech is in moments when people with a lot of power and pressure are able to wield that pressure. Because we've seen it waffle. We've seen academic freedom waffle.
Yeah, and we were speaking with some scholars last week about this, and the not just in the U.S. either. This was also in
Of course.
Canada. There was a whole network of universities that were kind of joining together to repress the student movements for pro-Palestinian student movements, um, and that figures into like in that new compact, which was the same day you filed this lawsuit, or that you filed a lawsuit against A&M, you and the or AAUP and AFT had a response to the new compact that they've just released. And one of the first things that compact talks about are these quote unquote violent student protests,
Yeah, of
which is
course.
all just sort of a code for anyone who's not anyone who's pro-Palestine, effectively,
Right.
right? Because that's the only protest we're talking about here. So, um,
I, I mean, I'll just say there that, you know, the college students, and not even college students, high school and college students, young adults, have, I think, for the history of this country, probably for the globe more importantly, always been a mirror, right? They've always forced us to look at ourselves and the society we want to
mhm,
build and look ourselves in the mirror. And the Vietnam War is like very powerful, and the civil rights movement, very powerful examples of young people, college students doing that. In fact, one of the reasons there's been 60 years of divestment is because of the power of our campuses in fueling the anti-war movement and civil rights movement. But that aside, what they want to do is get rid of that mirror. So the encampments in 2023 around the genocide, or I guess that was in the spring of 24, like that was a huge and important moment for us to see young people standing up like that. And what the federal government, but even it's got to be said, even before Trump, under
exactly.
Biden,
You, you,
they
you know, they,
they
they they
were
they set the they
just as
set the path. Yeah.
they set the path forward. And then all of our administrations. I remember the summer, but I was president of the Rutgers Faculty Union or Academic Workers Union at that point, and the summer between the 23-24 academic year and the 24-25 academic year, like
Hmm.
100 universities got together and worked with like risk assessment firms. And that's when all those time, place, manner restrictions popped up on all of our universities,
Hmm.
restricting where like Rutgers has something called a free speech zone, which is it's like so ironic. But like so like you can your free speech is you can go to one place to express your
Sure.
free speech. And so I think that hundreds of universities had similar TPM, time, place, manner restrictions that they place. So it's not only the Republicans and the Democrats, but it's also our administrators that
Yeah.
are a party to this extreme clampdown on our students' rights.
Well, and this is all of a piece of most what you were just talking about earlier about that website being scrubbed of your colleague. A lot of this sort of premature compliance, right, which is in some ways almost a riskier problem than even this new compact that they've put through, or any of the potential policies that they have, which is that administrators, faculty start just sort of saying, well, I guess I'm going to err on the side of caution here, which means saying the least uh, problematic or least controversial thing about what's going on, right? You're just going to sort of be timid. Don't duck your head, just kind of get your work done. And that's going to kind of erode any of that potential resistance from faculty or eventually students. That seems to be the goal, right?
Yeah,
Even in
I see it the
The
same way.
A&M case is certainly, that by making all these policies very vague, you don't know if you could say something about race, you don't know if you could say something about gender and be on the right side of this policy because it's very vague. So might as well just err on saying nothing.
Exactly. Exactly. And I remember one of the named faculty in the lawsuit is Leonard Bright. He's on national council. He teaches at Texas A&M at College Station. And I remember him saying when they passed the law, but before they reviewed his syllabus and tried to force him to change what was in the syllabus, and he refused. And that's why he's one of the named in the lawsuit. And I remember Leonard saying, Dr. Bright saying, it is our ethical duty to put the key text we believe a student needs to know in a specific field of or subject area in regardless of what they say. And I will stand up no matter what, and I will make sure that X reading that I know the censors won't like is in it. If I have determined as an expert it should be in it. And it's been that statement has sort of been like the North Star for how we responded to this, which is we can't we can't comply in an anticipatory way. We must stand up for higher education, for teaching our students, for the fields of subject that we're experts in, as opposed to these clowns in our state legislators or even governors like Greg Abbott. It's on us to stand up. And Leonard like showed the path there,
Hmm.
and I think that look, different academics are in different situations. If you're an adjunct faculty, you're more insecure, right? And so
Sure.
like we need to understand people's security, and we need to ask those who are the most secure to stand up the most right now, recognizing the problems we have in our sector. But in either case, we should be standing up the way Leonard did.
Yeah, it does seem like we have to have those examples, and the more the better. Uh, what I find really dizzying as I look at the second compact that the Trump administration or Linda McMahon, WWF, I don't know who's putting it together, but the way these terms, sort of academic freedom, meritocracy, marketplace of ideas, they've all been sort of emptied of any content, right?
Yeah.
So we're all kind of agreeing that these are important, but increasingly what they mean is a kind of political Rorschach test as to whether you're a fascist or not. It sort
Mhm.
of when you have uh, the ambassador talking about academic freedom, um, that does seem like it's difficult to push back against their policies if you're having to kind of have that conversation on that hegemonic field, I guess.
I completely agree. And you know what drives me? Like the nerve of Linda McMahon to send out a letter and ask questions of university leadership on, 7 questions. At the same moment when they're trying to freeze and stop federal funding for our biomedical research infrastructure, they're crushing our international students and therefore like our universities. That like we need to be asking her very direct questions about what their plans are to safeguard higher ed, because it doesn't seem like they have very serious plans about the future of higher education.
Yeah. Well, I think the question is whether they think it has a future. I mean, I think that seems to be the real
You're
issue,
totally right, Sean. You're
which is,
totally right. I
like I
mean,
think that's ideal for them is to have the least amount of future. So,
well, it's true. I guess we tend to be too nice about this. If you read Project 2025, it's pretty concrete what they think. They think that if women go to college, they are likely to have 1.2 children, but if they don't go to
mhm.
college, they're likely to have 1.9. And what they really mean is white women, and
Sure.
their great replacement theory and is disrupted, and so they want women not to go to college so that they can have more white offsprings. That's in Project 2025. That
Sure.
credentialization, over credentialing is a problem, particularly for women and starting their families. Therefore, they shouldn't go to college. We also note that if you go to college, you're more likely to vote Democrat, which of course they don't like. And finally, if you don't go to college, you're probably more likely and easily misled So like
Hmm.
all of these things line up to their desire to destroy college so that they can have a pliant fascist population they can like sheepdog. And
Yeah.
so I mean, what we need to do is push back exactly to the opposite of that and call for a free public system, right? That's why a real response to that is not please stop beating us up, but it's actually
Yeah.
offering a proactive vision for the future of the sector that calls for free public higher ed so that our working class kids, black, brown, white, etc., can get an education and get it without incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And that's the future we want so that everybody can get college educated, not just a few. And I think that's what our response needs to be.
And so this takes us back to the blueprint, right?
Yeah.
This is, we spoke in January. You were in the process of, I think you were surveying some of the members, conducting
Hmm.
listening sessions in order to construct this political platform to strengthen and transform higher education. And now this platform has been launched, the blueprint. So do you want to say a little bit about the pillars of this blueprint? Because you kind of just hinted at a few of them right there. You've named a few of them.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say here from our vantage, one, I think we're making an argument. And the argument is that a real democratic society depends on a really rigorous education system. And I would say, and this is not in the blueprint, not just a higher education system. We need more funding to our K-12 schools. We need
Sure.
free early childhood learning, pre-K, etc. And then we need a free public system and debt-free pathways for our private system. And and to me, that is the foundation, the very foundation of a democratic society. Not 500 billion new dollars into the Pentagon to create bombs
Sure.
to drop on Iran, but
Hmm.
a free public system that is amazing, the best system in the world. And so that's the real vision. A democratic society is a learning society, and people are
Yeah.
not widgets that should
Sure.
be. I mean, I think McMahon is saying that by like kindergarten or first grade you should know what your career path is now. I mean, I get it, she and her ilk are wrestlers. I actually was a wrestler in college, but a different type of wrestler,
Different
not
kind
pro.
of wrestler. Yeah, I think you
Yeah.
probably did more actual wrestling than
I
many.
did. uh, but like, they want to straitjacket kids in a very
Hmm.
early age when kids blossom in all sorts of different ways. We have a different vision. And so the vision is a fully funded public system that is like really robust, both in its training and educating to create the next nurses, the next engineers, lawyers, doctors, school teachers, but also so that we can do cutting edge research.
Yeah.
And also one of the reasons that the U.S. higher education system has been um, the best system in the world is because we have invited so many people from across the world in, the best and brightest
Sure.
minds from across the world. They've come, they've been educated, they've become a part of our country, and they've contributed, and that's a great thing. And so, at the foundation, we want to argue that higher education is critical to economy, to this economy. It's critical to healthcare and innovation. It's critical to creating democracy and critical thinking skills. It's critical if you want to have a good nurse, good doctor, good engineer. Um, and so we want more investment in it. And that means, and so from my vantage, that there's like a bunch of things that like are the horizon we want to fight for. And that horizon is a free public higher ed and debt-free pathways, an end to contingency. We do not, we have a sector where a majority, and I'd say probably between two-thirds and three-quarters of teaching is done by people who don't have permanent positions. And many of
Yeah.
them are applying for their job semester over semester, one job at a time, with no
Yeah.
health care and no benefits, and then asked to do work without an office that they're not being paid for, like writing references for students that they taught, even though they're
Yeah.
only paid for the class and not for the. So we need to end that system. I'm not saying some people want to stay part time. That's great. be part-time. But if you're going to be part-time, you need to be treated with respect and dignity. And we need to create more full-time pathways for our faculty across the board.
Hmm.
And we need to create work with dignity. So we want a free system. We want work with dignity for all workers in that system and an end to contingency by and large. We want a much more rigorously funded biomedical research infrastructure. We want student success, student achievement, students graduating on time and being able to find jobs.
Yeah.
We also like recognize that like not everybody wants the same thing. So a higher ed system means really great community colleges, really good, really great regional four-year colleges, really great big public four-year R1 institutions, great private institutions, also great vocational schools, right?
Yeah.
Like a diverse system for folks, and also importantly, two more things: um, fully funded HBCUs, minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities. And finally, and importantly, to go back to something we were talking about, a recommitment to academic freedom,
Right.
a recommitment to students' right to protest and speech and expression, and a recommitment to real shared governance in our universities where, you know, I'm sorry for going on, Sean, but I just want to say this one
No,
thing.
that's why
There's
you're
this,
here,
there's
Todd.
this, there's this, there's this like magic act that Ron DeSantis and Chris Rufo and authoritarians in government have been playing on this, on us, which is that they're saying, "Oh my God, higher ed is so bad. Look at all those lefty faculty, right?" And all they have to measure this is that the majority of faculty vote Democrat. Who knows what that really tells us? But whatever. That's their big point, right? Um, but the real problem with higher ed is not that we indoctrinate our students. I think about the 60,000 members in AAUP, the 400,000 AAUP and AFT higher ed members, and the faculty therein. And the majority of them are teaching students how to become a better nurse or how to think about string theory and or like
You're
uh,
right. How to write, how to read,
had a right to
how to
read
think.
yeah, but it's not like every class is like, they would have you think that every class is reading Mao's Little Red Book. That's just not what's going on in higher ed. It's and the real problem is a structural problem, and it is that higher ed has become too expensive because federal governments and state governments have divested and pushed the burden of higher ed onto the backs of students and their families who are going into debt at the tune of $2 trillion. And so they have tricked the American public into thinking the problem is faculty, when the problem is not faculty. The problem is that we are not investing in a system and we're putting the burden of higher ed on our students who are going into debt and working class kids. It's becoming less and less accessible to.
Yeah.
That's the real problem. And it's a trick that we have to solve.
Uh, and I mean, and these pillars are really comprehensive.
Yeah.
But it does look like kind of what you hinted at earlier. This is an even more uphill battle in our current environment than it would have been 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So in addition to all the attacks around faculty governments that we've talked about, they've also come after the research funding. They've tried to limit student debt relief. They've hurt the TRIO program and even Pell Grants to an extent. So you're in a serious fight, not just to restore the status quo, but to expand it. And so so this is a big fight.
It certainly is.
Is it a better time to have this fight than it was 2 years ago? Like, is there something about this moment that makes it better or
Yeah, I think
more
that
opportune?
I think there's two things that make it opportune. First and foremost, the destruction that the Trump administration has laid onto our higher ed system exposed some realities that we probably weren't dealing with. And so now I think it offers their destructive force offers us a moment to reimagine, I believe. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the debris can come something I think that's actually really great, that the first constitutional democracy deserves, a higher ed system that really supports this country. I'm not going to like sugarcoat the history of this country. It's always had its dark and light moments, or good and bad moments. But I think we have a moment to reimagine a higher ed system for all of us. And so one, your ask is like, why now? One is that within the debris and destruction of the Trump administration is a good moment to reimagine. The other is, relatedly, well, two others, but relatedly, is that I believe they have, like, the fascist regime has pushed so hard that there's a pretty strong swing back about that's happening, emerging. We're seeing it in our elections, where progressive candidates who are putting forward progressive visions about public good and investing in the public good through wealth taxes, etc., is a
Hmm.
vision, and getting money out of politics is a vision we should be leaning into. And I think if we're going to think about what to really invest in and what the society is we want to build, education has to be right there center to it. And so I think as we see a swing away from this authoritarian war machine government towards a society for all, that we can really fight to center. Again, I wouldn't just say a free public higher ed system. I'd say a learning society that
Hmm.
includes free early childhood learning, greater investment in our K-12 system, and then, yes, a free public system. And also, I'll add one other thing, which is AI is also the other side of this coin,
Yeah.
where the technology Silicon Valley right wing that's emerged,
Yeah.
that is behind Trump. Um, they are also trying to remake our universities and also society writ large. And I think higher ed becomes even more, like, some will say it becomes less important in the face of AI. I would say quite the opposite. It
Hmm.
becomes more important because, say
Yeah.
you're working, you're a lawyer and you're 40, and you're doing contract law, and all of a sudden AI is writing all the contracts, and maybe you lose you're no longer able to hang a shingle and have a practice because you lose your clients. You need a place to reimagine your life, right? Now we need to fight against the displacement, job displacement, and we need to fight for worker governance over AI. I feel very strongly about that democratic control of AI. But in and where we win those fights is an open contested question, and we also need to make sure people are taken care of. And we're better to like have a learning society where people can reimagine themselves than having a very robust higher ed system where people go, they get educated, they come back, they learn more, and they organize and they build power. And so I think that for that reason, there's a strong opportunity, I think, to really fight for the kind of vision for higher ed that we're putting forward.
Yeah, I think that certainly the conversation around AI is within every college right now, every college classroom. That becomes one of the main things we're having to talk about. You know, what's the policy in your class? How are you going to implement it? How are you going to help students think about it? So yeah, that's certainly another front to consider, especially when there's all this money being poured into elections by those AI, uh, the people who are trying to advance AI. So, but as I understand it, the point of this platform is, it's certainly about pushing for this vision of higher ed, but it's also to get politicians who are running in the 2026 is to get them to sign off on this as an endorsement. And you made the first endorsement
We
last
did.
month, a highly publicized Michigan Democratic senatorial primary competition. The AFT and AAUP endorsed Dr. Abdul El Sayed for his support of this platform, which is a historic first for AAUP. So how did this endorsement come about? What was the process of
Yeah,
getting them on board?
it's been very controversial. Um,
Is
uh,
it?
yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me, but people, there's two things that people have been arguing. One is that AUP shouldn't be endorsing, which I find crazy. And I don't think there's an argument there that can be sustained. The other is that we shouldn't have endorsed in a primary. Um, so I would start with the candidate himself, which is a big reason why we endorsed. And one interesting part of it is his proximity to AUP. His father was the president of Eastern Michigan University AAUP, which is a collective bargaining chapter. And he has been a member and he comes out of the academia. And I've met and talked with him a few times, and he really like believes in the same vision we have that I've been articulating as a critical pathway forward. And so the way this began was we weren't really we were gonna planning to mostly endorse in the midterm elections, but in the general, not in the primaries. Our key partner in Michigan at the state level is AFT Michigan. AFT Michigan voted to endorse Abdul said. And all of the higher ed unions in Michigan that are AAUP are in that body. And so they were part of that process. And so after AFT Michigan endorsed, and because of the relationship he and his father have to AAUP historically, the leadership of our locals turned to me and said, look, this happened. You should really consider this. We want you to consider this. And so I had a meeting with all the leadership of Michigan, AUP, and AFT had endorsed, and they did a poll, and I think something like 80% of their membership supported endorsing him. And so then we decided to have an all-member meeting, and we of Michigan members only, and we did. And in that meeting, 97% of the folks in the room said that they wanted us to endorse uh, Abdul.
Wow.
Said. And so, and I'll say one or two other things like
strong number.
What?
That's a strong number there.
They are very strong numbers, but like another two things that are important is that like we have a partnership with a group called Higher Ed Labor United. They had a town hall on higher ed and the Senate race in the fall. They invited the three candidates at the time, McMorrow, Stevens, and El Sayed, and Stevens decided not to come. Then McMorrow dropped out. And then our biggest local is at Wayne State, Wayne Academic Union. And Wayne sent questionnaires to Syed and Stevens, and Stevens didn't respond to it. And El Sayed did and said the things like what we understood. And so, first and foremost, we endorsed him because we need champions for higher ed. And Stevens didn't even think it was worth her time to talk to us or answer our questionnaires. And so, what are we supposed to think about her vision? Right? I don't trust her. And so that's why we endorsed in the primary. And I think it's great. I think he's gonna he's a fantastic candidate, and he's gonna hold our banner high. And I expect there'll be a big event sometime in September around the future of higher ed with Abdul El Sayed, and we will like push for him to win because he represents our vision of higher education. And after that, what I would expect from AUP in the fall, and we have work to do though, is that we do multiple endorsements for the general or for the midterms. And so I would expect people to see, and maybe they're going to hand wring when we do it, or maybe they're going to celebrate it, and probably both. But people should expect to see multiple endorsements. And I'll say this, we'll endorse anyone who's talking about the kind of vision for society we have.
Yeah.
Progressive Democrat, centrist Democrat, I don't care, Republican, if they share our vision, then we want them to be elected. It is true that a lot of our vision tends to coordinate with some of the emerging progressive Democrats, but that's not like what we're calling for is a fully funded system and the investment through wealth tax and other means to get that funded system and make it possible. And so if you are interested in that, we want to talk to you.
Well, and I think that there's a growing populist case for much of that. That is a threat to both the Republican and the kind of establishment Democrats. So it is an interesting way forward. So are there other candidates you're already speaking with, or this is kind of like an open process right now?
I mean, right now, what we're doing is we're looking at the races. We're really looking at two types of races, to be honest with you. One type of race is a race where we have a lot of member density, where it's a really critical swing race, and a person will stand by some, if not all, of our vision for higher ed, but really like at least aligns with our vision or is not attacking it, which many are. We're running for office right now. So there's those types of races, and then there are races where the candidate is just like fully aligned with us, and we think of them as like a champion for higher education. And so, yeah, I would expect, anywhere from 5 to 10 endorsements sometime. I would say probably in the month of September, we'll probably release them, but we won't do it without working with in X state or in X district, working with the locals in that district, having real democratic, transparent discussion with them, making sure there's real alignment, talking with the candidate or giving the candidates questionnaires, making sure there's real alignment, and then moving into an endorsement.
Well, so you have lawsuits going, you have campaigns around funding, you have the campaign for the blueprint. What else is going on with AAUP-AFT in the next few months?
I mean, the biggest thing and the thing that's foundational to all this is organizing on our campuses. And so, we are running, I'd say, 10 campaigns for new collective bargaining units across the country right now, AAUP and AFT together in higher ed. Can't really talk about that many of them publicly because they're underground soon, but I think that in total, right now, we're working to bring collective bargaining rights to about 50,000 higher ed workers and would expect that the large majority of them have collective bargaining rights within 2 years. And then in places where we don't have collective bargaining rights, we're trying to win collective bargaining laws. We won Maryland legislation to enable collective bargaining in higher ed. We're fighting for it in Virginia. We'll fight for it in Colorado. We'll fight for it in other states where we think it's possible, where we don't have it yet. And then once we win that, we'll move into like getting people collective bargaining rights. And then where we don't have collective bargaining rights in private institutions, or it's not that we don't have collective bargaining rights, is I mean, if the administration chose to recognize our right to collectively bargain, we could do it. But in those states, we're just building power at the campus level. And so I think we can't win electorally. We can't win a big legislative vision. We could win in the courts more so, but we can't win against an administrator that wants to strip Roz Siegel's site of his speech around genocide or our students' rights if we're not organized at the local level on the campus. And so first and foremost, that's the foundation of all of this. Since we came into leadership, the organization has grown by 50%. It was 40,000 members when we came in. It's 60,000 now. I'd like to see at the end of my first term, which is 4 years, that we've doubled membership to 80,000. This is AAUP proper. And then with an AAUP and AFT, every year we're growing, and I think we're the fastest growing higher ed union in the country.
Well, I think those numbers speak for the fact that this is a vision of higher ed, if not, widely held in the culture, which I think it probably is, but certainly within the sector, the workers there appreciate bringing a fight to this struggle rather than only being on, back on our heels and prematurely complying with everything. So appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you, Sean. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciated it.
Well, thanks for making the time, and maybe we'll check in again and see how things are going.
Anytime. I am so honored to get to do this with you, Sean.
Next spring. So next week we're going to talk with Andrew O'Neill, who's a journalist and labor leader in Maine, about the Senate race there and the meaning of the Graham-Plattner campaign's collapse. That episode will be on the Breaking Culture Live YouTube channel, and this episode will be available later today. So please share it with your colleagues and let us know if you have any ideas for future episodes or invitees by emailing us at breakingculturelive@gmail.com. Again, I'm Sean Johnson Andrews. Please check out my Substack at breakingculture.substack.com.